Welcome back to Sam's Mini Workshop, where today we are going to be continuing along with our full tutorial of how to paint Castellan Crowe for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. In our last video, we went over all of the steps required to paint silver armor for Castellan Crowe. So if you haven't checked out that video, you can find that on the channel, and I would highly recommend going back to have a peek at that one before moving on with this next video here. Because in this one, we're going to start working on some more of the other details that appear around the armor. And so there are a number of ones we're going to try to cover today. We're going to go over the various black details, including the undersuit, as well as the bolter casing. We're going to cover some of the red details, minus the cape and the banner, because those are going to be their own videos. We'll go over the little bits of leather that are there, mostly just around his belt. The cover for this book that we've got on his belt here, as well as the white details that appear on one of his pauldrons. Right, so we're going to start out today with our black details. And so for this, I went back in and I went around to all of the areas on the model that were meant to be black. And I just went in and kind of blocked in all that black again, made sure that there was no silver or anything like that sitting on there so that we're ready to move on with the next step. And you can do that with any black that you choose, just like a pure black. So what we're going to start out here with today is we are going to look at the undersuit portions of the model here first. And so for the first step on this, we're going to add a chunky highlight to all of those ribbings in there using Castellan Gray. And I'm using a relatively small brush for this. It's a Rosemary & Co. Series 8, size 0. And my goal is basically to just cover that whole section of all of those ribbed areas with this gray, leaving the black down in the recesses. So take your time with this, because it's obviously it's a pretty intricate area of the model. We want to make sure that we don't get any of this gray onto the silver armor that we've done. We also want to make sure that we don't drop any of it down into the black recessed areas of the undersuit. So take your time with it, just kind of moving your brush along each of those ribbed areas. And if you do happen to drop down a little bit into the black areas, that's okay. You can just take a little bit of black and go back over it to cover it up, or same on the other side. If you were to get a little bit on the silver, just go ahead and grab that base coat silver and go back over the area that you accidentally got some gray on. So we're just going to keep going with that, moving nice and slow until I've gotten it all over all of those ribbed areas. Okay, so I'll work around the whole rest of that area there separately, but you can kind of see what we're working with here. The next thing I want to show is the bolter here. So what we're going to do is we're also going to apply the same step to the casing on the bolter. And so you can see that there. We have part of the area, this area tucked back in here, that's going to be a metallic color. But all of this other area, this black area, is going to be our casing to the bolter. And so what we want to do is we just want to go in and apply like a nice chunky edge highlight to all that. So I'm just going to use the tip of my brush and run this color along all the edges to create a nice chunky highlight there. Our goal is going to be to get that highlight about twice as thick as the thinnest highlight that you're able to edge highlight that you're able to produce. So take your time with it. A good way to start to do it is to do just like a standard edge highlight and then widen it out a little bit from there. If you're having a hard time judging how thick it needs to be. So we'll just keep working around that whole area of the bolter, getting a nice thick chunky edge highlight on there. Alright, so I'm going to work my way around the rest of all of our various black details of this armor, and when then that's all said and done, I'll come back and kind of show you where we're at. And I apologize, I believe I forgot to mention this at the beginning when we started here, but the color we're using for this is going to be Eshin Gray from Citadel. Okay, so here is what those gray detail looks like with that highlight of Eshin Gray on there. Okay. It's subtle, but it does do a nice job of starting to pick out a little bit of definition there. On the bolter, I have a dog hair off there. On the bolter casing, you can see we've gone around the whole area with that Eshin Gray as well. Okay. So now our next step we're going to add an even finer highlight to this for the purposes of starting to build up a little bit more definition there. We're going to use Wizard Gray from Two Thin Coats for that. If you wanted the Citadel equivalent, that would be something like Dawn's Zone. And then what we're going to do, if we're starting with the leg, what we're going to look to do is pick one of our panel areas there. So with our ridges, there's our undershoot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a thin highlight of this just inside the existing highlight of Eshin Gray. And what I'm also going to make sure to do is not go all the way down to the end of each of the ridges. I'm going to follow it along, but I'm going to leave just a little bit of that Eshin Gray showing towards the end of each ridge. Work my way down through all of the different parts of the undersuit doing that. Now on the bolter, what we're going to do is we're going to highlight and get our edge highlight inside the previous existing highlight that's there. Okay, so if we can see our, like on the edge along here, what I can do even is just make sure I take a lot of the excess off my brush, and then just using the edge of it, I can gently skim along the edge of the casing there to build up that brighter highlight, keeping it inside of my existing highlight of that Eshin Gray. On the part where it's a little bit, angle's not as intense, and we're going to have to use the point of the brush. Just make sure you're real comfortable. It's like this part right here. Just make sure you're real comfortable, and then slowly work down the middle of that previous highlight with your lighter gray until you've got a nice line going there. And if you need to go back in and add a little bit more of your previous highlight stage in order to really get the definition between the two, that's totally fine. So I'm going to work my way around all the rest of the black sections adding in this next stage of highlight, and then we'll come back and we'll have a look at it. Okay, and so here we have the results of our next stage of highlights there. Added on a little bit of brighter gray to those highlights. I did it all the way around this armor here, including the under part of the suit. Got it running all the way around our bolter casing. So we're going to push that a step further here by adding another thin highlight just out towards the more prominent edges of the black armor areas, or black detail areas, I mean. And we're going to use that using some Carcharodon gray from Two Thin Coats. If you wanted something from Citadel, Administratum gray would be your equivalent here. So our goal with this lighter gray is going to be to really try and focus it towards the areas like prominent corners or areas that are going to catch a lot of light. So on these curved areas of the undersuit here, I'm going to try to focus it more towards the areas that I think like light will be catching. So for this leg here, what we're going to do is I'm going to try to focus it mostly towards starting kind of at this outer edge and bringing it towards the middle of the leg. And same thing on this side, I'm going to start and I'm going to pull the color towards the area where I want it to be brightest. And you don't need a lot. It's fairly subtle on these curved areas. But the idea is to try to we're going to try to draw attention to the spot where in theory light would be catching the most. Something kind of like that. And so then I would repeat the same thing for all of those areas of the undersuit that I felt like would be catching light. So for example, on this leg here, this portion kind of in back here probably won't be catching light, especially because that's going to be covered by his cloak. But this area here on the outside may catch some light. And so I'm going to go in with just a little bit of extra highlight to those curved areas to give them a little bit more definition. Areas like the underside of the suit, I'm not going to add any of this at all to, because that'll mostly be in shadow. But I'd work my way around the whole rest of the part of the armor doing that with the undersuit. On the bolter, it's going to be a little bit different. On this, we're going to focus it out towards the most prominent corners and edges of the bolter casing. So for example, that would be pick a corner like this bottom one here, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just a little bit above it, and I'm going to take my brush, just run it along the edge, and I'm just going to run it down to that corner. And same thing, I'm going to flip it over and do it on the bottom and run it in to the corner there to create a little bit of a sharper highlight on the bottom. Now what I want to try to do is move my brush towards the area I want to be brightest as much as I can, because wherever you take your brush off is where the most paint is going to be left, even with a slightly thicker consistency. So I want to try to leave that brightest spot towards the area that I want to be brightest. So if I was up here on this corner, what I would do is I'm going to take the brush and I'm going to run it up to that point there, up to this point here, and then what I would do is I'm going to take just a little bit of that color and I'm going to bring it down to the point just there, so that we have kind of all three of those areas that intersect, and we've got them highlighted now. So I'm going to keep working my way all the way around, and then once I'm done, come back and we'll take a look at what the next step's going to be. Okay, and so here we have the finished highlights, adding in that lighter gray. Here's what it looks like on the bolter. So just one more step here on this gray armor, or these gray details, and then we'll be all complete. And that is we're going to just go in and add a dot highlight using a pure white. So I've used that AK white here. It's going to be my choice. But any pure white would be just fine. We're going to do that on all of the edges and like the corners. So on the bolter here, we would go around and we've got, there's a corner here, and we're just going to lightly touch it onto there. We do not need a large amount. Just a very small dot is what we're looking for here. So this point where all three edges come together, could give it a little dot. Try not to get too crazy with it. The idea is just to have a very subtle dot on there to finish this all off, not to have like a big dollop of white on there. So a little white dot there. So yeah, I would just go around bolter casing and do a little white dot on all of those sections. On the undersuit, the armor here, you really don't have to do it at all if you don't want to. If you want to add just kind of at the apex of where you feel like the light would be catching the most, just like the tiniest little dot on here, very subtle, you can add that in there if you'd like to. Like I say, absolutely do not have to do that if you don't want to. But it can just be a little extra something that from a distance can kind of help draw attention to the point of like, this is really where the light would be catching here. All right, so I'm going to go around and finish all that, and then the white armor, or not the white armor, the white details, or black details, my goodness, I cannot talk. The black details will be complete after that. Okay, so we have finished all of those black details on the armor. I've also finished up casing for our bolter. We'll go back and we'll finish the metallics on it later. But I've also done all of the highlighting for the other sections of those black details of the undersuit that are on the armor as well. So we are going to move on to the next detail we want to cover here, and that one is going to be to do some of the leather detailing. And so there's not much of this on this particular model. Mainly, it's just this belt that kind of runs around the back or in front of his waist. So we're going to take care of that now, partly because it is tucked in behind a lot of other detail. And so if we don't do it now and we do some of the other stuff surrounding it first, like chains and other things like that, when we go back to do it later, we'll have a much harder time getting in there and kind of cleanly taking care of getting that leather painted. So we're going to take an opportunity to do that now. And we are going to start out by giving it a nice undercoat of Huros leather from 2 thin coats. If you wanted the Citadel equivalent, that would be Rhinox hide. And then we'll go in and we'll block in that belt. Right, so that's in here. And don't worry too much about the things like the chains or other details on the back of the book as you're base coating this, because we'll have an opportunity to go back and clean that up later. Just do your best not to get anything on any of like the black details or the silver armor that we've already painted. Of course, if you do, it's no big deal. You can just go back in and get that cleaned up with some of those base coats at a later date. We're going to come around to the back here as well and get this part of the belt that's kind of wrapping itself around behind the book here. Also, we'll want to make sure to get just one little detail on the book itself, and that's going to be the like tongue of this latch here. We're going to do the rest of the book in a different color for that leather, but we want to just get in there and base coat in that little leather tongue at this time as well. And then there's a little bit more of the belt just back here behind these trinkets that he's got on the belt. Okay. So I'm going to go around. I'm going to make sure that that's base coated nice and evenly. Give it a couple of coats there, and then we will come back and we'll work on getting it shaded and highlighted. Okay, we've now got our belt base coated. You can see it kind of tucked away in there. So now we're going to put a wash on it. To do this, I took some black paint, just any matte black you want to do, and I mixed it into the Rhinox hide, or in my case, the Kiros leather, but Rhinox hide if you're using Citadel. I mixed the black into that in about a 1-to-1 ratio to get a darker version of that brown paint. And then what I did is I thinned that down on the palette with a decent bit of water, looking for something of about a wash consistency, kind of like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up a little bit of that on my brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm just going to wash this all over all of that leather, just making sure to really kind of concentrate it into some of those areas that are a little bit more recessed, like the center of the belt. Alternatively, you could also use like a pre-mixed wash like Agrax Earthshade for this as well, or any other sort of brown wash. That would be totally fine. I just like to use like paints that are mixed together and thinned down because I think that it gives me a little bit more control both of the application and of the color that I'm creating. So we're just going to wash that all over to darken down the leather a little bit and to add some shading into that recessed portion of our belt there in the middle. So once you've got that all over there, including on the little tongue of our book latch here, we're just going to let that dry completely, and then we will come back and we will start getting that highlighted. Okay, so our wash is dry now. You can see it's darkened down the leather quite a bit. And I did go in and give it a second coat over the first once it had dried, focusing it mainly towards the center of the belt to try to pull in a little bit more shading on it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to come in and we're going to highlight that belt. And I'm going to do that in our first layer using some Steel Legion Drab from Citadel. So I thin that down on my palette. I've got just a little bit on my brush, and I'm going to give kind of a chunkier highlight over this brown here. Now it's going to be a little hard to do like too much of a chunky highlight because it's, really tucked away back here. But I want to try to get like a nice prominent highlight on the parts that are visible here. So there. So next up, our next highlight is we're going to kind of do a lighter, almost like texture highlight using some Carrick stone. And I'm going to come in, and instead of doing like a straight line with it, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of sporadically dot this onto the leather to create the appearance of some texture on there, almost like it's a little old and the leather's starting to crack in some places. Just to add a little bit of interest. Don't have to go crazy with it. Just kind of randomly dot it along inside your previous highlight. So there we have the finished effect of that. Gives it just a little bit of texture, breaks it up a little bit, and gives the leather an appearance that it's a bit aged. Alright, so that's really going to take care of basically that only leather detail that we're going to do with this color on the model here. Next, what we'll do is we're going to get into painting the cover of this book. Okay, we're going to begin to work on base coating in the cover of this book here. So that leather. And if you look at the box art, it's almost kind of a dark purpley red. And I didn't quite have a single color that fit well with that. So instead, I created a mix about 1-to-1 of. Sorry, wrong bottle. I created a mix about 1-to-1 of Incubi Darkness and Asmodeus Red from Two Thin Coats. This would be the equivalent of Corn Red if you wanted to use a Citadel paint. So I mixed these two together to get that kind of like darker, almost purpley red. And so what we're going to do is just get that cover of that book base coated. Just taking care not to get anything on that little leather piece there that we've already done. So I'm just going to come in and we're going to run this along all these sections of the book. I'm going to try my best not to get too much of it on these other details that are going to be silver and gold. But, if you do, that's totally fine. I'm sure, get a little bit on there. But basically, our goal here is just we want to try to get a nice, even base coat all over the cover of this book. All right, so I'm going to finish going over that, probably give it a couple of coats, and then we'll come back and we'll have a look. All right, so there's the cover of our book. All base coated in with that dark purple red. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to get some shading going on there. To do this, I took some black and I added it into that base coat mix that we had going on. And then I thinned it down really heavily to create myself a wash. And this, instead of going all over it like we did with that other leather, I'm just going to run it into the recessed areas and keep the base coat that we had going on clean. So I'm just going to take it and we're going to run some of it into those recessed areas. Darken those down. We may need to do a couple of coats of this in order to really get it down to the point we're looking for. And that's alright. But just take your time and as neatly as you can, run this into all of those areas of the leather. Including, we want to make sure that we're also getting the recesses around these corners here. We're just feeding it into there and along the chain. Just as neat as you can, feed it into those recesses as well. So I'm going to go all around, finish getting this all shaded in, and we'll come back and we'll see how it looks. Okay, here is the result of getting all that shading put in on our leather book here. So now to highlight it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in some Skeleton Legion by 2 thin coats. Citadel, this would be Shabby Bone. I'm going to add some of that into our base coat mix. And I noticed on the box art that the highlights didn't really move up through a series of reds. It almost seems like it just moved up through a series of almost kind of like bone colored, being added into the purple. So we're going to add in just little bits at a time so that we don't get too massive of a contrast. But it's going to be the same kind of thing. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to start by giving it a bit of a chunkier highlight on all of these edges, so that I have room to work inside that highlight for the next stage. So I'm going to keep working my way around here, getting all of this highlighted in. And then once that's done, we'll come have a look and we'll keep pushing those highlights a little bit further. Okay, and here we have the result of that first highlight stage. See there, it's subtle, but it's starting to pick out some nice detail for us. So now we're going to push that a little bit further. And I did that by adding more of that Skeleton Legion or Shabby Bone, whichever you prefer to use, into the previous mix. And so we're going to come back through now, and we're just going to apply a thinner highlight along all of those edges. So when you can turn and use the edge of the brush and just skim that along the edge there to get a nice thin highlight. Unfortunately, you can't do that everywhere, so where you have to, just go ahead and turn the model and follow the edge along as best you can. Alright, here's our finished highlighting from that stage there. So we're going to take it just a little bit further. I'm going to do that by adding even more of our Shabby Bone into the mix there. And just kind of like we did with the casing of the bolter, I'm going to focus this towards some of the more prominent corners and upward facing edges. So like an easy one would be the crest at the top of the book here. We're just going to go in and lightly apply that across the whole top there, because that's a pretty prominent area that would be catching some light. Right. Other areas would be in and along here. And so there you can see some of the effect of getting in a little bit of a brighter highlight on that book. Also, while we're doing this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of that previous highlight stage that we had, and I'm going to start to just create just a little bit of like wear and tear weathering on this book. So I'm going to use that to create just, some fine scratches in the leather. here and there. Nothing too crazy. Doesn't need to be, excessive or anything like that. But the idea is that this is probably a pretty old book. And so it would make sense that there would be some damage on it here and there. So we're just going to kind of go in and just kind of sporadically dot in a little bit of texture, a little wear and tear onto some of the sections of this book here. And I like to do it with kind of a, I guess you could say, like a dotting motion as I move the brush, rather than doing streaks, because I think it makes the texture look a little bit more worn, a little bit more natural, as opposed to if I was just drawing perfectly straight, lines across the leather. More realistic, as if it had actually, gotten scratched or dinged or something like that. And if you want, you can take it a little bit further even by going to that final stage highlight that we had used just there. And then just inside the area where you had previously been scratching, you could just add a couple of dots here and there as well, just to, again, draw some attention and some extra highlight to those areas. So there we go. We've got that weathering on the book now. So I'm just going to go one more step here. We're just going to do a little bit of a dot highlight. And I'm going to do that just getting a little bit of the Ushabti bone on its own. We're just going to come into those little areas that we had done before and just give them a little dot. Yeah. There we go. Our book is all done there. And with that, it will bring us to the end of today's video. I really want to thank you all for taking the time to watch. If you liked this video, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support really does help me continue to grow the channel and make more content like this for all of you. Also, if you're looking for additional content or photos of the progress on this model, feel free to hop over to my Instagram, which is @SamsMiniWorkshop, where I post a lot more stuff related to my miniature painting. So I will see you all next time when we will tackle doing the red and white details that are on the model. So I hope you all have a great day, and until next time, have fun painting.